A 35-year-old Scott Beane of rural Watford City, North Dakota, has now been charged in the bizarre, horrific murder of his mother on September 12th of 2023. This happened about 3 miles south of Watford City, North Dakota. Reading from the criminal complaint, the victim in this is listed as Jane Doe, but the McKenzie County Sheriff has identified the victim as Scott Beane's mother. Again, reading from the criminal complaint, quote, on September 12, 2023, at the residence of 12661 22nd Street Northwest in McKenzie, North Dakota, there was evidence of a fire and a death. The deceased was identified as Scott Beane's mother. The caller, Richard Scott Beane, indicated that he had arrived at the residence and located his wife within the entryway of the residence, deceased, appearing to have been burned to death. Richard stated the residence itself was not on fire, just the entryway was burned. Richard indicated that he was unable to gain access into the residence itself as the door was locked. Richard stated he believed his 35-year-old son was locked inside the residence. Members of the McKenzie County Sheriff's Office arrived on scene at approximately 5:48 p.m. Deputies observed the deceased remains of Scott Beane's mother, whom appeared to have significant burns to the entirety of her body in what appeared to be an unclosed mudroom, as well as evidence of a recent fire. Deputies forced entryway through a door within the enclosed mudroom, which led them into the main living area of the residence. Deputies noted that upon forcing the door open, they observed what appeared to be a dining-style chair that had been barricading the door itself. While inside the primary residence, members of the McKenzie County Sheriff's Office came to a closed and locked door within the hallway of the residence. Deputies could hear water running and a male making groaning noises at the other end of the door. The male, later identified as Scott Richard Beane, did not comply with verbal commands given by deputies. Deputies were ultimately able to gain compliance both verbally and physically of Scott, leading Scott exiting the bathroom. Upon exiting the bathroom, Scott's hair was visibly wet. Scott was detained and later charged with a firearm-related offense. A search warrant was obtained to process the scene for evidence. Members of the North Dakota State Fire Marshal's Office, BCI, and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and McKenzie County Sheriff's Office Investigation Division responded to the scene to aid. The affidavit gathered information from Richard regarding the physical condition of Scott Beane's mother and the family dynamics of the Beane family. It was discovered the victim had paralysis on the right side of her body, creating limited mobility. Given an injury, she'd recently required the use of a walker, which was reported to be within arm's reach from her at all times to assist with mobility. It was discovered the victim spent the majority of her time in an electric handicap assistance chair in the enclosed mudroom. While processing the scene, it was apparent the majority of the fire damage occurred to the electric handicap assistance chair, as well as the body of Jane Doe. There was significant soot covering the four walls of the enclosed mudroom. However, the fire appeared to put itself out before continuing to spread. ATF investigator confirmed the electrical components of the handicap assistance chair were intact and were not the cause of the fire. Investigator indicated the scene itself suggested there to have been set fire. The affidavit writer of this complaint conducted an interview with Scott on September 15th at the correctional facility. Scott stated he stood in the doorway of the residence looking into the enclosed mudroom where he saw Jane Doe on fire crawling towards him as he stood in the doorway. Scott stated he heard Jane Doe screaming, his mother. Scott stated he closed the door and braced the door by wedging a dining room chair against the doorknob. As the interview of September 15th continued, Scott said, "She is a smoker anyway. Who gives a shit?" The interviewer informed Scott of his mother dying in a horrific manner, to which Scott replied, quote, "Yup." During the search of the residence, there was a working wireless landline telephone within arm's reach of the door. Scott admitted to closing and ultimately barricading. When asked why he didn't call 911, Scott replied he didn't think about calling 911. As mentioned previously, the victim's paralysis required her to use a walker to be mobile within the residence. During the processing of the scene, the walker was located in an unnatural position out of the victim's reach. The walker itself did not have any soot or evidence of being in the room when the fire took place, as a white cloth purse attached to the walker itself was clean and unscathed. Paint transfer was located in the front of the paint transfer was located on the front of the walker, matching paint disturbance located on the inside of the main enclosed mudroom door. These findings suggest the walker was removed from the enclosed mudroom prior to the fire taking place. It also suggests that the walker was propped up against the inside of the main entryway door in attempts to brace or barricade the door, similar to what Scott admitted he did with the dining room chair. Through further investigation, it was learned Scott may have recently been displeased with the victim and Richard, his parents, thinking they had been taking money from his bank account. Richard explained to law enforcement that the night before September 12th, Scott had been outside making fires in a cooking-style pan with denatured alcohol. After conducting a fire scene examination, reviewing witness statements, reviewing photographs and video, as well as other evidence, ATF agent classified the fire as incendiary. Incendiary. ATF uses the definition to include willful ignition of a fire or explosion in an area or under circumstances where there should not be fire. On November 3rd, the writer of this report received the official report of death from the State Forensic Medical Examiner's Office. The cause of the victim's death was determined to be from acute thermal inhalation injuries. The manner of Jane Doe's death, the victim, was ruled a homicide. The above provides probable cause that Scott Beane intentionally set a fire within the enclosed mudroom of the residence while the victim was present within. This intentional act caused the death of Jane Doe, who was ultimately confined to a space she could not escape as she was on fire and lacked the ability to become mobile given her paralysis. A paralysis Scott Beane knowingly took advantage of on September 12, 2023. Scott Beane knowingly set fire within the enclosed mudroom of the residence while the victim was present within. The act caused the death of the victim. The above gives rise to probable cause to charge Scott Richard Beane with murder. This is a Class AA felony in the state of North Dakota. Again, that's directly from the criminal complaint. Class AA felony carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. He remains in jail, bond set at $5 million. I'm Neil Carlson reporting for iNewZ.TV.